Okay, so Shakespeare and at Virginia Woolf's opinions on Shakespeare and how he got to have the job that he got. So Virginia Woolf has told this story in which she imagined Shakespeare did not have a sister, but a bishop said to Virginia Woolf said in public that any woman in Shakespeare's day could never have had Shakespeare's genius. You have to be a man to be a genius like that. And Virginia Woolf thought that was stupid. But she doesn't say it's stupid directly. What she says, well, let's imagine, what a life would have been like. What if Shakespeare had a sister that, just like Shakespeare, was interested in the theater and wanted to learn stuff and be in, direct plays and write plays and stuff. And so she imagines this in the form of a story. And in her version of the story, the girl, just like Shakespeare, goes to London to try to become a great theater person, but she doesn't have her parents don't send her to school. She doesn't have the education. And then because it wasn't really traditional to send women to school back in those days. And that also, when she gets there, no one will let her in. And she ends up sort of getting led astray by some dude. Who gets her pregnant, and she ends up killing herself because she wasn't able to kind of follow her gift and her dream. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at this thing a little bit more. So Virginia Woolf says that more or less is how the story would run, I think, if a woman in Shakespeare's day had had Shakespeare's genius. But for my part, I agree with the deceased bishop, if such he was. It is unthinkable that any woman in Shakespeare's day should have had Shakespeare's genius. So Virginia Woolf is a little bit kidding here. But she says that she thinks that he's right. She thinks he's right for a different. She's joking because what she's doing is she's saying, "I think this bishop is right, but he's right for reasons that he doesn't understand." When the bishop said this, he thought that literary genius men were literary geniuses and that women just weren't, and it was something in their genetics or something in their soul or whatever ridiculous thing he imagined. He imagined men and women were fundamentally different, and that women had a different kind of soul, or a different kind of genetic makeup, or whatever, and that as a result, you couldn't really have female literary geniuses like Shakespeare. The only people who could be the next Shakespeare is going to have to be a man. And Virginia Woolf, sort of joking, says she agrees with him. She says, you know what, I think he's right. I think because he said that no woman in Shakespeare's day could have had Shakespeare's genius, and she says, you know what, I could have written Shakespeare. No one, what did he say? I'm sorry, get the exact thing. It is unthinkable that any woman in Shakespeare's day should have had Shakespeare's genius. And she sort of agrees with him in a jokey way, but she's going to do it to kind of change how you imagine to understand these words. So she says, that more or less is how the story would run, I think, if a woman in Shakespeare's day had Shakespeare's genius. But for my part, I agree with the deceased bishop, if such he was. It is unthinkable that any woman in Shakespeare's day should have had Shakespeare's genius. For genius like Shakespeare's is not born among laboring, uneducated, servile people. And she says that she thinks he's right. She's kind of kidding. She says such as was born in England among the Saxons and Britons. She says it is not born today among the working classes. Right? She says you got to be rich and important to be a great writer. How then could it have been born among women whose work began, according to Professor Trevelyan, almost before they were out of the nursery, who were forced to it by their parents and held to it by all the power of law and custom? And so she says there's no way you could be a genius. A woman could be a genius just for the same reason. There's no way a poor person could be a genius. Now, I realize some of you are probably getting mad at Virginia Woolf because you think she's being snobby and cruel, but she's not. She's sort of still kidding, and she's going to have an explanation soon. So don't get mad at Virginia Woolf and turn this video off because she has a point that I think you'll all agree with and that I agree with, and it's very, very valuable. So she says here, right? She says that genius can't be born among women because it's not even born among the working classes. So how could it be born among women who are expected to do all this work almost before they were out of the nursery, who were forced to it by their parents and held to it by all the power of law and custom? Yet genius of a sort must have existed among women, as it must have existed among the working classes. right? So she says she changes her mind. Wait a minute. She says part of the joke she's telling, and she says, well, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. She's, she's like, yeah, I see what he means, right? There's no way a working class person, a poor person, could possibly be a genius, and for the same reason, no woman could be a genius, because they got to work all the time. The women are expected to do all the laundry and all the cooking and all the housekeeping and all of this stuff. Um, and so she says, and she mentions a couple of people who kind of break out of the mold. She says now and again an Emily Bronte or a Robert Burns. So Robert Burns is like a very poor. We talk about Wordsworth like regular people. Robert Burns was like a poor person who was a great poet. And Emily Bronte was a woman who was a great poet and novelist. By the way, nobody reads Emily Bronte's poetry, but it's fucking rad. Emily Bronte is one of the very fucking best, and Wuthering Heights is a great book, and you should read that book. But really, Emily Bronte's poetry is just she's so fucking cool. Um, Charlotte Bronte, I have much less patience for. Um, she says, now and again, an Emily Bronte or a Robert Burns blazes out and proves its presence. So every once in a while, you do get a poor man or a woman who becomes a great genius. But certainly, it never got itself onto paper. Right? A lot of people, when they write, they may have they may be a genius inside, but do they have time to actually write? When, however, one reads of a witch being ducked, that's dunked in water to either drown her, really, um, or of a woman possessed by devils, or of a wise woman selling herbs, or even a very remarkable man who had a mother, I think we are on the track of a lost novelist, a suppressed poet, or some mute and inglorious Jane Austen. That's Jane Austen's a great novelist who's a woman. Some Emily Bronte who dashed her brains out on the moor or moped and mewed about on the highways, crazed with the torture that her gift had put her to, the gift being her literary genius. Indeed, I would venture to guess that Anon, meaning anonymous, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman. It was a woman, Edward Fitzgerald, I think, who made the ballads and the folk songs, crooning them to her children, beguiling her spinning with them, or the length of a winter's night. She ends by saying, this may be true, or it may be false. Who can say? So she says right at the end there that the thing that she's written about is not necessarily true, right? She's just made this stuff up. All those details about there was like, the woman, the Shakespeare never had a sister, and she imagines the guy at the door sort of laughing at her. But she ultimately says, listen, this is I'm just making this up. And she says, this may be true and it may be false. Who can say? But what is true in it? So it seemed to me, reviewing the story of Shakespeare's sister as I had made it, is that any woman born with a great gift in the 16th century, that's Shakespeare's century, would certainly have gone crazed, shot herself, or ended her days in some lonely cottage outside the village, half witch, half wizard, feared and mocked at. For it needs little skill in psychology to be sure that a highly gifted girl who had tried to use her gift for poetry would have been so thwarted and hindered by other people, so tortured and pulled asunder by her own contrary instincts, that she must have lost her health and sanity to a certainty. Um, and this is especially tragic when you recall all of the sort of she's sort of imagining all of these sort of crazy women figures, these sort of witches and local medicine woman and raving homeless ladies and all these crazy people, and she imagines that all of them maybe were great novelists, except they weren't given a chance to be. Um, they weren't given the chance to do the things that Shakespeare was given a chance to do. Um, so her main takeaway here, sorry, I keep moving my head like this so I can see how much time is passing on the YouTube video that I'm making, so I can stop it at under 10 minutes. We went Wordsworth's. This is the authors and art unit. Wordsworth's point is that a work of art is the emotional expression of an author. And Harold Bloom's point is that authors are in competition with each other to be the best, and that competition shows itself by the way they revise and fuck with each other's ideas. Virginia Woolf asks a much bigger and more complicated question about art and authors, and it's one of the most important questions about art and authors that you're going to get all semester long, and it's this. What kind of people are given the chance to be authors in the first place? Because it takes time and resources to be an author. And if you take a look at the title of this piece that Virginia Woolf wrote, it's called A Room of One's Own. The reason it's called a room of one's own is because Virginia Woolf says that's what you need to be a great writer, a room of your own. And you need time to be in there to do it. And a lot of women are not given that room of their own. And a lot of people are not given a room of their own. And if you're living in New York City during a COVID-19 lockdown, you might not have a room of your own. So we'll pick up this conversation in the next video.